everyone, I hope you all are doing good. So I am back again with another video, and today we will be discussing the next video for miscellaneous laws, wherein we will be covering Muslim laws. Now, as I have been saying again and again, all the Hindu laws, Muslim laws, the fraction of the questions from these laws have been on a decline, but we still need to read them because we never know what will come in the paper. So let's just go through it. Now, starting with Muslim laws. So Muslim law is also known as the Muhammadan law, right? And it is not just a set of legal rules, but a moral and spiritual system that we need to understand, right? Whenever we talk about Muslim laws, the Muslim laws are divided into two sects. The Muslims are divided into two sects, the Sunnis and the Shias, right? And even in Muslims, we have two separate kind of laws. One is the Shias and the Sunnis, right? So in India, Muslim personal law is applied through the Muslim personal law, that is Shariat, right? Application Act of 1937. This act provides that all questions regarding the personal matters of Muslims shall be decided according to the Muslim personal law of Shariat rather than by legal customs. I hope this much is clear. Now, starting with the source of Muslim law. I'm really sorry. The source of Muslim law, the primary source is the Holy Quran. Quran, as we all know, it is the holy book of Islam and it is considered the direct word of God which was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad. Now, it is the highest and the most authoritative source of law, and nothing is beyond the Quran when it comes to Muslim laws. So, it contains moral guidance as well as specific legal injunctions relating to marriage, inheritance, contract and crime. Though only about 8 verses of Quran directly deal with law, they form the foundation of all other Islamic legal principles, right? For example, Quran Sharif, the Quran introduced the right of women to inherit property, which was revolutionary for its time. Okay, so this is something that we need to remember. Now, Hadith or Sunnah. What do we mean by Hadith or Sunnah? So, these are the sayings or the actions and approved of Muhammad. These were the actions and the sayings which were approved by the Prophet Muhammad. When the Quran was silent on any issue, people looked to the Prophet's example, right? So, whatever the Prophet did or the way he explained it became the Sunnah. Next is Ijma. What do we mean by Ijma? Ijma means consensus. After the Prophet's death, Islamic scholars and jurists reached a consensus on new legal questions by interpreting the Quran and the Hadith. Right? Example here is the rule that grandparents can inherit if parents are deceased was established through ijma only. That was consensus by the noblemen. Now, qiyas. So, qiyas is analogical reasoning, right? So, when no direct guidance existed in the Quran or Hadith, scholars used analogy and reasoning to apply existing principles to new situations, as we do in every other law, right? So the Quran prohibits alcohol because it intoxicates. By analogy, narcotic drugs are also forbidden, right? So this is the law behind it. Now we move ahead to the next or the secondary sources of law. In the secondary sources of law, we have the customs or the urfs. Customs are nothing but the practices or the traditional practices which have been going on since so long and which have been in practice since so long. Now, next we have legislation. So some laws like the Shariat Act of 1937 and the Dissolution of Muslim Marriage Act of 1939 are the legislations which deal with the Muslim personal laws. Then judicial decisions or the precedents which have already come out and wherein important principles were decided can again be a secondary source of law. Now, schools of Muslim law. We have these schools of Muslim law in the Sunni school. Now, schools are nothing but ideologies or the set of ideologies which people follow. So, Hanafi is the most followed school in India and it was founded by Imam Abu Hanifa. It gives way to reasoning and public welfare. The next one is Maliki, which is based on the customs and the practices of the people of Medina, right? Then we have Shafi, which emphasizes both on Hidat and limited reasoning. And last one is Hanbali, which basically is the most conservative school, relying strictly on the Quran and the Hadith, right? Then we have Shia school. It follows the interpretation of the Prophet's family and descendants known as Imams, right? The principal Shia school in India is the Itana Ashir or 12-word school, right? Now, let us talk about nikah. Nikah is marriage, right? So, in Muslim law, marriage is considered as a sacred contract between two individuals. Now, when I say contract between two individuals, we have already studied contract and we already know what should be the essentials of a contract. क्या essentials होने चाहिए contract के? Let's see the nature of contract. Nature of marriage under Muslim law. So, marriage under Muslim law is considered as a civil contract. Very important, right? Though it has a strong religious and moral dimension, it legalizes sexual relations, ensuring legitimacy of the kids and legitimacy of the children, and imposes mutual obligation between husband and wife, right? Then the next one is, there was a case of Abdul Qadir versus Salima, wherein the court held that marriage under Muslim law is a civil contract and not a sacrament like the Hindu marriage, right? Next, what are the essentials of a valid marriage when it comes to Muslims? Let's just talk about the essentials here. Number one is offer and acceptance. ये सब ना हमने contract में किया हुआ है. But how is it implemented when it comes to actual nikah or actual marriage? So, offer and acceptance, which is known as lijab ul kabul, right? Kabul, right? I'm really sorry. Ijab ul kabul. So, it is both must occur in the same meeting. That is, whether both the parties give their consent to getting married or not. That is known as kabul. Next is free consent. Free consent must be given without coercion, fraud or mistake. Then we have competent parties, and here we need to understand that in Muslim personal laws, once a person attains puberty, both the parties must be of sound mind and have attained puberty. That is presumed at the age of 15. So the age to get married in Muslims is 15, right? Hence, this is something which you need to remember, right? And the party should be of sound mind again, because a contract which is done with a person of unsound mind is void. Next, there should be at least 2 male witnesses, or 1 male and 2 female witnesses are required under the Sunni law. Then, as we have the concept of dowry, wherein material goods or money are given to the boy, when it comes to Hindu law, we have the concept of dower. What is dower? It is the meher, or the money or the amount which is given to the female when it comes to a nikah, right? So, a compulsory payment by the husband to the wife, right? And only if the wife is happy enough with the meher or the amount that she is getting from her husband, does she say kabul for her marriage, right? And it is a compulsory payment. There will be no marriage without a meher when it comes to Muslims, right? I hope this is clear. Next, no legal prohibition. So, parties should not be related within prohibited degrees. Again, there are certain prohibited degrees when it comes to Muslims, and that has to be taken into consideration. Now, what are the types of marriages? Very important for us. First one is a sahih, which means a valid marriage, which meets all the legal conditions. Next is a fasid marriage, which is an irregular marriage, which means some requirements are missing. For example, absence of witnesses is there, and it can be rectified later on. Hence, it is known as an irregular marriage. Then we have a batil marriage, which is a void marriage. If it is prohibited by law, for example, within the prohibited degree, such a marriage will be a batil marriage. I hope this is clear. So, when we talk about Muslim laws, there is no concept of a voidable marriage. In case of a voidable marriage, we have irregular marriages. That is a fasid marriage. Now, moving ahead to meher. The concept of meher is very important for us. Why? Because it is one of the essentials, and it replaces the concept of consideration in a contract. Right? So, meher is a sum of money or property that the husband must pay to his wife as a mark of respect and security. It is an essential element of a Muslim marriage, and meher is not the price of marriage but an obligation imposed on the husband as a token of respect for the wife. I hope this much is clear. Now, moving ahead to types of meher. What are the types of mehers that we have? First is a prompt, which is known as muajjal, right? So it basically means payable immediately on demand or before consummation of marriage. So this is the type of consideration which is pre-handedly given, right? Then we have deferred or payable upon dissolution of marriage or death or divorce. Now there is mubajjal, which is given to the woman, which is basically agreed upon at the time of marriage, but milti kab hai jab inme se koi condition, right? This is known as muajjal. A wife has the right to refuse to live with her husband until prompt meher is paid, right? Let's say the wife wants the meher, so she can simply say, I don't want to live with this man. Why? Because my meher hasn't been paid to me. And there was this case of Abdul Qadir versus Salima, wherein meher is an enforceable debt against the husband, right? Now, talking about divorce. Divorce का concept बहुत ज़्यादा flawed है when it comes to Muslim laws. Most of the people don't know the exact way in which Muslims can file for divorce or how they actually take divorce, right? We just presume that this is the way it is done, or whatever the movies have shown us is the correct way of divorce in Muslims. Let's just read through it. Now, divorce is known as talaq, and Islam allows divorce as a last resort when reconciliation fails. The Prophet discouraged divorce but recognized it as a necessary in some circumstances. Number 1, divorce by husband. अब कौन सी conditions हैं जहाँ पे husband can take divorce from his wife? Number 1 is talaq ul sunnat, which basically means an approved form. O Hasan, which basically means ihsan or Hasan. Single pronouncement of talaq followed by a period of abstinence or iddat is revocable during iddat. Now, let's say the husband wants divorce from his wife through ihsan. He simply has to say talaq once, and then he has to stay away from his wife for the entire iddat period. Iddat period is 1 lunar month, right? So this is what it is. And if he wants कि नहीं मुझे तलाक नहीं लेना, तो वो इद्दत पीरियड के दौरान रिवोक कर सकता है अपना तलाक, right? Then next type of talaq is Hasan. Hasan basically means 3 pronouncement during 3 successive periods of purity. Periods of purity mean when the woman is not menstruating, right? So in those days, if for the 3 consecutive months the husband during those 3 months says that I want to divorce my wife या मैं तलाक लेना चाहता हूँ, that can be done. And the periods of purity are known as tuhar, right? That is known as talaq o Hasan. Talaq e Hasan and talaq e ihsan. These are 2 types of talaqs, right? Then we have something known as talaq ul biddat. Now, what do we mean by talaq ul biddat? It is known as triple talaq, and it has been made unconstitutional, or it has been made illegal in India, right? What was talaq ul biddat? Wherein the husband would say talaq, 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 and that would have been considered as talaq in India, right? Now, it was instant pronouncement of talaq thrice at once. Declared unconstitutional in Shaira Bano versus the Union of India in 2017, the Supreme Court held that triple talaq is arbitrary and against the Quran's teachings. Right? I hope this is clear. So now we are left with only 2 types of talaq, that is talaq ul sunnat and talaq. In talaq ul sunnat, we have ihsan and hasan. Right? I hope this is clear. Now we move ahead to divorce by wife. अब अगर वाइफ डिवोर्स लेना चाहती है तो वो कैसे डिवोर्स ले सकती है फ्रॉम हर हस्बैंड? फर्स्ट थिंग फर्स्ट इज तलाक ए तहवीज़, in which the husband delegates his power of divorce to the wife, usually through a pre-marital or post-marital agreement. Clearly एक agreement होगा जहाँ पे husband कहेगा कि if my wife also wants to divorce me, she can do so. And just because the husband has allowed his wife to take a divorce, this is known as talaq e tahweez. Next is li'an. So when a husband falsely accuses his wife of adultery, she can seek divorce through the court. This is known as li'an. Right? अगर husband ने गलत allegations लगा के of adultery अपनी wife से तलाक का सोचा है, then he can be held liable and the court can grant them divorce. Then divorce by mutual consent is known as khula. Divorce initiated by the wife in return of consideration. For example, she returns the meher. Let's say the wife said that I don't want your meher, I don't want this marriage. She can simply do so, and that will be mutual consent by khula. Right? Then we have mubarat. Both husband and the wife mutually agree to end the marriage. That is known as mubarat. Right? Then we have the judicial divorce. Under the Dissolution of Muslim Marriage Act of 1939, a wife can seek divorce on specific grounds such as husband missing for 4 years. इस केस में अगर husband 4 साल से गायब है without any explanation or anything, then the wife can seek divorce. Failure to provide maintenance for 2 years. The husband is not maintaining his wife for 2 years, even then the wife can take divorce. Husband imprisoned for 7 years or more. Husband को जेल हो रखी है for 7 years or more, the wife can take divorce. Then, husband is impotent, insane, cruel, or has converted from Islam. Even then, the wife can seek divorce from her husband under the Muslim Marriage Act of 1939. Right? So, I hope the concept of marriage, that is nikah, and divorce is clear to everyone. If it is not, go through the video again. Right? Listen to whatever I have said and try to understand it. Now, moving ahead to maintenance. Now, what is maintenance? It is nafqa. Right? That is known as maintenance. अब maintenance पे बहुत बड़ा एक केस लॉ था और एक बहुत लैंडमार्क जजमेंट आई थी जो हमें समझनी बहुत जरूरी है. Right? The concept of maintenance ensures that dependents are not left destitute. कि जो dependents हैं on the person, dependents कौन होते हैं? जैसे कि minor kids, the parents, the wife, they can be dependents, right? So wife is entitled to maintenance during marriage and iddat only, right? अब let's say एक divorcee है, divorced wife है, तो कब तक उसे maintenance मिलेगी? That is something that has to be decided. So it is 3 months after the marriage. बस तब तक. Right? Then, divorced wife entitled to fair and reasonable provision under the modern interpretation. Next, children, sons till puberty and daughters till marriage have to be maintained by the husband. Right? Then, parents, if they are poor and unable to maintain themselves, only then are they given maintenance. Right? Then, important case laws. The first important case law for us here is Shah Bano Begum versus Union of India, wherein Shah Bano, she basically there was no concept of maintenance in Muslim law, right? There was no concept of maintenance in the Muslim personal laws. But Shah Bano Begum, she wanted maintenance from her husband who seek divorce from her. Now, she filed a case under section 125 of the Criminal Procedure Code, that is CRPC, which provides for maintenance for all the citizens of India. Now, here, as the law granted maintenance to her, even after the iddat period, this was held that the Supreme Court said that if a divorced woman is entitled for maintenance under section 125 of CRPC even after the iddat period. This was decided and this was a landmark case law. Then the next case law is Daniel Latifi versus the Union of India. The court clarified that under the Muslim Protection of Rights on Divorce Act of 1986, the husband must make a fair and reasonable provision for the future of the divorced wife within the iddat period, not just for that period. Right? I hope this is clear. यहाँ पे interpretation को broaden करा कि सिर्फ iddat period के लिए नहीं, but during the iddat period you have to see how you'll maintain your wife later on as well. Now, let's just talk about guardianship. अब guardianship क्या था? Guardianship refers to the legal authority and duty to take care of minor children and their property. So, what is the order of guardianship? Order of guardianship clear है. सबसे पहले the first natural guardian is the father. Next is the paternal grandfather. Paternal grandfather here is Dadaji, right? Next is executor appointed by the father or the grandfather, guardian appointed by the court, and the de facto guardian. So see, in Muslim law, the mother is never the natural guardian of a child, right? So there was a case of Iman Mandi versus Mustasadi, in which the de facto guardian cannot alienate or sell a minor's property, as they have no legal authority. Why? Because they are merely de facto guardians or by fact the guardians. Who are de facto guardians? डी फैक्टो गार्डियंस वो होते हैं जिनको कोर्ट ने नहीं अपॉइंट करा, किसी ने नहीं अपॉइंट करा, बट जस्ट बिकॉज ऑफ द फैक्ट ऑफ द सर्कमस्टांसेस दे बिकम द गार्डियंस. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, लेट्स से देयर इज अ चाइल्ड जिसके पेरेंट्स की डेथ हो चुकी है एंड वो अपने मामा के साथ या अपने चाचा के साथ रह रहा है. चाचा becomes the de facto guardian here, right? So de facto guardian usually takes care but has no legal authority, right? I hope that is clear. Next is the concept of inheritance. Inheritance मतलब property किसके पास जाएगी. So Muslim inheritance is based on equality and blood relationship. Property passes immediately on the death of the owner, right? There is no concept of joint family property as in Hindus. Now, categories of heirs. First thing first, we have sharers. Who are the sharers? Those with fixed shares, such as spouse, parents, and children. They are known as sharers. Then we have somebody known as residuaries. Residuaries are those who take what remains after the sharers. And lastly, distant kinders are those more remote relations who inherit in absence of the above. अगर ऊपर वाले नहीं हैं, तो the property goes to the distant kinders. For example, if a man dies leaving a wife, one son and one daughter, wife gets 1/8 of the entire property, right? The remainder is divided between the son and the daughter in the ratio 2:1. This is very important for us to remember, right? I hope this is clear. Now, let's just talk about gifts. Gifts in Muslim law are known as hiba, right? और हिबा क्या होता है? अ गिफ्ट अंडर मुस्लिम लॉ इज अ वॉलंटरी ट्रांसफर ऑफ प्रॉपर्टी विदाउट एनी कंसिडरेशन. वॉलंटरी ट्रांसफर मतलब कहीं फोर्स नहीं यूज हुआ, कोर्जन नहीं यूज हुआ, एंड समबडी हैज गिवन योर प्रॉपर्टी, गिवन यू समथिंग विदाउट एनीथिंग इन रिटर्न, विदाउट एनी कंसिडरेशन. सो व्हाट आर द एसेंशियल्स ऑफ अ वैलिड गिफ्ट? नंबर 1, declaration of the gift by the donor. Second, acceptance by the donee, and lastly, delivery of the possession. And the same was held here in this case, wherein all three elements are necessary for a valid gift. अगर एक भी नहीं है, it is not a valid gift. Now, here are a few important legislations when we talk about the Muslim law. The first one being the Muslim Personal Law, that is the Shariat Application Act of 1937. Next is Dissolution of Muslim Marriage Act of 1939. Then, Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce Act of 1986. And lastly, we have the Waqf Act of 1995, which regulates the management and the administration of the Waqf properties. Now, what are the Waqf properties? जिनके कोई heirs नहीं होते, जिनका कोई भी आगे नहीं होता, उनकी property किसको चली जाती है? There is this board which is known as the Waqf. सारी property वहाँ चली जाती है. Now, what is the Waqf Amendment Bill Act? अभी recently बहुत ज़्यादा हंगामा हुआ है इस पे. Let's just talk about what exactly is the Waqf Amendment Act. Originally, there was the Waqf Act of 1995. It self-evolved from the laws in 1954, which governs how Waqfs are managed, their registration, protection, and the administration. The government proposed, amended it in 2024 and 25 under the name of Waqf Amendment Bill or the Waqf Amendment Act of 2025. The aims claimed by government include better management of properties, dealing with encroachments, using transparency, surveying and registering Waqf properties properly, etc. This is what the government was saying कि इस वजह से हमें amendment की जरूरत है. Now, what were the major changes? Number 1, there are some key amendments which were there. First thing first, Waqf by user provision removal. Under the old law, even if a property was used continuously for religious or charitable purposes, it could be accepted as a waqf by user. Many old mosques, graveyards, etc. are in this category. The amendment proposes removing or altering the provision that could mean many properties that have been treated as waqf historically do not have formal documentation, may lose that status and waqf board से वो government के पास आ सकते हैं. Then, more governmental executive oversight or power shift. District collectors may get new powers, right, to verify the ownership, to decide disputes, waqf property claims, right? Waqf board's autonomy may be reduced. Why? Because अभी तक तो waqf board देख रहा था. Just because if we make this change, the government or the local authorities will get more power over the waqf board. Now, the next one is inclusion of non-Muslim members and women in the Waqf board. This was seen as something which is actually being hindering the main purpose of the Waqf board. So the amendment bill proposes including at least 2 women and at least 2 non-Muslims in the board. The government claims this is for ensuring oversight and diversity. The critics, however, argue that the religious character and the control of Waqf institutions is going out of their hand. Right? Now, registration, survey, mutation of records, etc. The bill seeks to fix problems of missing records, unclear ownership, encroachment. The government says huge number of Waqf properties are being encroached. Many are unregistered and records are scattered. But how this survey verification process is done and who gets to decide is still under scrutiny and it has not been decided yet. Next, application of limitation, time bars and legal remedies. So some provisions in the old law give finality to certain Waqf claims if uncontested. The new law may change this and meaning old claims could be reopened again. Right? So I hope this is clear. Now, so what are the objections here? Number 1, threat to religious autonomy. As again I have said that there is a fundamental right to religion and to manage the institutions of the religion. Hence, the critiques here say that they are infringing their fundamental rights. Next is risk to unregistered or historic Waqf properties. This is something that the Waqf board has been saying that if such a law comes up, then we may lose our Waqf properties. Then potential encroachment or loss of property, as I've already mentioned again. Then political or constitutional concerns. As a constitution has to be amended wherein there are certain provisions which may go against the constitution itself. Also, it gives more control to the political heads and also to the people who are ruling at the local level. Now, lack of adequate constitutional safeguards. Critics say that the community stakeholders, that is the Muslim bodies or the Waqf boards, are not properly consulted and many amendments perceived as sweeping changes without sufficient debate. Next, we have government's arguments. Now, what the government has said is that we are doing so to need to clean up mismanagement or encroachment. Secondly, they are saying we will include them and have an oversight over what the Waqf board is doing. Then, righting historical wrongs. So, anything which has been wrong back in date will be corrected now. This is what the government is trying to say. Then helping the marginalized section, and lastly legal backing with parliamentary approval is required here. Hence the government wants a legislation to do so. So all these things have been said in the Waqf board and this is what the entire bill is about. I hope you have understood the Muslim laws. Please don't get into the depths because again I am saying questions have been on a decline, but it was one of the important topics. We covered it. Hence, make sure that you just go through the video again and agar aapko koi bhi doubts hain, please comment down in the comment section below and I'll be more than glad to solve your doubts. Thank you.